Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Telefunken Electroacoustic. Telefunken Electroacoustic has been following the tradition of excellence and innovation set forth by the original Telefunken GmbH of Germany that began over 100 years ago, with one foot rooted in the rich history of the brand and the other in new microphone innovations for both stage and studio applications. Telefunken Electroacoustic is recognized as one of the industry leaders in top quality microphones. For more info, go to t-funk.com. And now your host, EYAL Levy.
Welcome to the URM podcast. I am EYAL Levy, and I just want to tell you that this show is brought to you by URM Academy, the world's best education for rock and metal producers. Every month on Nail the Mix, we bring you one of the world's best producers to mix a song from scratch from artists like Lamb of God, Meshuggah, Periphery, A Day to Remember, Bring Me the Horizon, Opeth, many, many more. And we give you the raw multi-track so you can mix along. You'll also get access to MixLab, our collection of bite-sized mixing tutorials, and Portfolio Builder, which are pro-quality multi-tracks that are cleared for use in your portfolio. You can find out more at nailthemix.com. I'm going to keep this intro short and sweet. Earlier this week, I flew to LA along with Mr. Sean O'Keefe to conduct this podcast with Patrick Stump, who's the singer from Fall Out Boy. Sean O'Keefe is on Nail the Mix this month, April 2019, and he's basically Fall Out Boy's original producer who produced that new track that we're doing, Lake Effect Kid, new old track. So I got them in a room together, and we talked about the old days and also kind of how it came full circle. It's just a cool episode. I'll shut up. Enjoy. Patrick and Sean, welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine podcast. Very stoked to have both of you here.
Stoked to be here. Same here. Yeah, thanks.
So let's just get right into it. You guys have known each other a really long time.
Yeah, I guess we have. I was thinking about it today. I forgot that Sean recorded my first band, my first real band. I was about 14, and he recorded. It was a really kind of weird, bad nu metal hardcore band.
What could be wrong with that?
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing that, in retrospect, my uncle at the time was like, take pictures, man, take pictures. And we didn't. And that's the great thing is there's not a lot of pictures out there of me with the pants, the Jinko pants and the...
Is that what you had?
Yeah, and the spiky hair and the... I didn't really have the hair for it, but I had the spiky hair and the, I don't know. It was a moment.
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
I won't mention the name of the band unless...
Yeah, no, thank you.
I can reserve that one.
How long ago was that?
I was about 14.
Yeah, so wait.
That was like 20 years ago.
It was like 20 years ago. So you could do the math.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And the interesting thing is that I had my little studio, which is where we met, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We met at the studio. And I had recorded all of you guys in Fall Out Boy in separate bands.
Yeah.
Joe in a separate band. Andy and Pete were in the band together.
Yeah, Arm Angelus. Yeah, you recorded them together. Yeah.
Well, I want to understand something because I know you're not 50 years old. Were you the kid, the kid in high school who had the rig?
I was, but when we did that, I was just out of high school. So I must have been 18 or 19.
When we did that first thing. Yeah, because from the outside, it was basically this thing where, because Sean had been in a lot of bands and a lot of the bands around, it was a small community of punk rock bands, in the Chicago suburbs. And Sean had been, the drummer in a lot of these bands. And it was pretty apparent early on, because he started recording everybody, that that you seemed to be more interested in the recording part. You still played drums, and you still did it, but it was really obvious. And so it was it kind of exploded in a very short amount of time, where everyone was like, we gotta go to Sean. So because I remember I remember you did the Danny and the Ketchups record.
That's right. That was my band.
Which is your band. And then in the span of maybe 2 years or something, it was everyone was trying to record at Rosebud or whatever.
It really became like a scene. I think it was that more than anything. It was just we were all friends. It was bands were friendly with each other, and I just happened to be the guy who had the little recording setup, and it was come in and record.
Well, he knew what he was doing. That was the other thing.
At least I was able to fake it.
Yeah.
Just
out of curiosity, what was the rig? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. It was an ADAT machine. Or maybe 2 ADAT machines, but yeah, it was ADAT machine. And so Patrick was a drummer in that band at the time. I didn't know Patrick as a singer. Did you even sing?
No, I didn't sing. So the singing happened very much by accident because I was kind of, it was weird. Everyone kind of is finding their place. Sean was kind of figuring out like that he really wanted to record, and that was more your thing. Even though he's a very, very good drummer, it's just kind of one of those. It doesn't come up all that much anymore. And I was kind of one of these guys that was on the periphery where there were a good 2 or 3 other drummers who were so good, who were so much better than me. But like I was about
Rocky.
Yes, Rocky, yeah. Rocky and DeMar. I mean, those are the two. Those two guys. DeMar ended up in Plain White Tees.
Yeah.
Whenever bands would, because drummers. That's like one of the things that's the premium that everyone's looking for. Everyone's looking for a drummer.
Is.
In every scene, everyone's looking for the drummer.
Yeah.
So every good band would go out for Rocky, DeMar, and then I was like the third guy you would call maybe. And I would never, and I would never get it, but I would always audition and stuff. I got in a couple bands, but I was kind of like one of the also-rans, and it was really frustrating for me because I was like, I just want to have a capacity to write songs or be part of the songwriting or part of that thing, I like being in a studio. I always knew I liked being in a studio, and I wanted to be part of the creative, and the drummer really didn't get to do that much in the bands I was in. It was kind of you had a songwriter or songwriters, and you were on the outside. So, but yeah, I had been a drummer, and the singing was literally it was me just being like, I'll do anything if you guys let me write songs.
Was production kind of like that for you,
I didn't know that.
Sean?
Huh.
Like that you were a drummer, but you wanted to have more involvement in the actual creative process and found production as your calling?
I don't know. I don't know if I can say that. I don't know. I think I just was interested in recording, basically. And definitely had the thing where I was a drummer and I played in bands, but like, yeah, the drummers around me, like the good drummers in the bands around me were noticeably like, holy shit, those guys are good. I better figure out something else. But
it's really good, I think, I think it actually is really tough when you're young to realize maybe I'm not great at this one thing, but there's this other thing that I could probably kill at.
Well, and I think for a lot of people that get into recording, especially and songwriting, especially, is you realize like you look around and you see instrumentalists, proper instrumentalists. Like Rocky was a full-blown drummer, right? And he lived and breathed drumming and was so good at it.
Yeah.
And there was no competing with it, right? There's no chance that you were ever going to do
life.
it. It's exactly like you're a real full-blown instrumentalist. And guys like Sean and I, and this is a thing that we kind of bonded on. It's like, well, I'm not the best drummer, but I'm good enough. And I'm not the best guitar player, but I'm good enough. I'm not the best anything, but I can kind of play a lot of things, right? And you start to go like, oh, like maybe my role is more like I know what everyone should do, kind of, and it kind of becomes producing. You know what I mean? Like totally. not like that arrogant. What everyone should do, but you kind of know you have a way of communicating with other musicians that that maybe a strict instrumentalist might not have, might not be able to. Because like one thing that I noticed pretty early on was like, oh, because I'm kind of an okay drummer, even though I'm not the best drummer, I can communicate better with my drummer, than the guitar players can. Yeah. And because I'm also a guitar player, you kind of become and Sean's also multi-instrumentalist. I think that kind of
the language definitely opens up. It definitely helps, doesn't it?
I was listening to a conductor on NPR talk about, having to understand the mechanics of every instrument in an orchestra. And it's kind of not...
I can confirm that's true because my dad's a conductor.
Oh, yeah?
And
no kidding.
Yeah, he's like, that's what he does. And when he was in university... back in the 1800s, he double majored in violin and percussion.
Wow!
But also knew piano and accordion of all things. but that
accordion's a mystery.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but it did. I think that was his first instrument. Yeah, that understanding is what led him to be world class at conducting.
Well, and you have to be fluent in it. Is what they were talking about. So which I don't want to make any. I don't really know anything on the scale of an actual conductor, but in a little punk rock sense, when you're when you're in a punk rock basement band.
Yeah, but you know what you need to do. Yeah. For your world.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have a better idea. It kind of just became connective tissue, and I think watching the way Sean kind of grew into a producer, it kind of extended out of that, where somebody in the room has to know how to tie it together. When you're in a basement, and whatever, one of the 4 or 5 of you has to have some idea of what the second guitar line should be, or what what this harmony line's going to be, or what that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of pretty early on. That was the thing that I think everyone knew about Sean was like when he was around, you were gonna sound better.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing that actually someone I work with told me about, that there's it's like a term from business, and sorry business people if I butcher this, but basically T-shaped people versus I-shaped people, and an I-shaped person is basically down the straight and narrow, like an instrumentalist, the person who for 30 years didn't go more than one day at a time without practicing guitar 6 hours. And that is their life. That is what they do. Yeah. I mean, they can write a little, and they can, maybe they can operate Pro Tools a little, but guitar.
Yes.
And that is what they do. And then there's T-shaped people who have like one thing that they're pretty damn good at, pretty damn good compared to most, but then there's a bunch of other things that they have more of a broad understanding in. So those are the people that usually can communicate the vision, and that's why they make good producers, for instance, or songwriters. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I feel like sorry.
No, wait, I have a question for you then, because, so I briefly knew you at that point, right?
Yeah.
But then, I'll get to when I discovered that you were a singer. And I have to tell that story because it's a fantastic story. Okay, but actually my question is, and I guess I've actually never asked you this or really understood it. So the in-between, so when did you start doing that? Like, so in high school,
singing?
like in writing?
So I had always tried to be a writer. That's like so for me.
Like from when you came in.
Yeah. Okay. They didn't really.
I didn't know that.
That band didn't really have. It was kind of one of these things where since I was a little kid, I would compose and write. I wasn't really one of these people that would write.
Shit, huh?
Yeah, I wasn't really one of these people.
I guess it shouldn't be surprising. But yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I did that more. That led me to play instruments. That was more the thing. Is I wanted to write. I wanted to compose, really, strictly melodically, harmonically. That was what I wanted to do from the time I was really little. Like, wow. I remember my brother got so my brother and I shared a room, and he had this Casio in the corner of the room, and he had gotten the soundtrack to 1989's Batman, thinking it was going to be the Danny Elfman soundtrack.
That is a good one.
Which is amazing, but he got the Prince cassette by accident. He's like, well, I don't want this. And he's like, if you want this, you can have this. And I wore that thing out. I was obsessed with it. I was about 5 years old, and I listened to that every day, but I also loved the Danny Elfman score. And my brother had that too.
Huh.
So I just obsessed over those two sides of that score.
Interesting.
And it's really, I feel like it's one of those things where if you listen to anything I've ever done, that should be obvious. That
totally.
I was really obsessed.
Totally makes sense.
I was really obsessed with the 1989 Batman soundtrack.
That's
and all.
fantastic.
But anyway, so it was me trying to do those things, and I was kind of an ass when I was little. I didn't really want to study or practice, and I just could play drums. It wasn't a thing I had to practice at.
Yeah,
so, and I think that kind of stunted me too, because I was never going to be a shredder. But me not practicing was pretty decent. It was better than the other kids in the snare line or whatever. And so I kind of just relaxed on that. And I think in a lot of ways that's kind of how I fell into drums. But it was always with the bent of like, I want to write your songs. And
so were drums kind of like a means to an end almost?
Kind of. But then there's also they were in terms of like, this is how I play in bands. But then there's also that innate, I'm one of those people, I know a lot of us are. Most of us that do music are this, but where you'll be tapping on things and beating out rhythms on the table without knowing it or whatever. So I do think there's that kind of thing where it's, well, I didn't necessarily practice, but I'm probably always practicing on some level, you know. Right. In terms of limb independence, I'll be driving and and whatever. My right foot's on the brake, so my left foot's doing the kick,
That's the one that needs more work anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, totally. So you find yourself subconsciously doing these things. So drums they weren't necessarily means to an end, but I think I fell into them because I had the earliest start, on them. Like guitar was a little bit harder for me. My dad's a guitar player and I would
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I would kind of my hands couldn't. He had this.
Was he a writer? Did he write?
Yeah, he wrote songs. He still writes. He's out there playing songs. But he had he used to have a 12-string harmony from 60s or whatever that he took every other string off, and he let us have as our guitar.
That's cool.
But it was so wide, and you're a little kid and you can't get your hands around it.
That seems painful.
It was very painful, and that's what I learned guitar on, and I couldn't, I just couldn't get anything to happen. So drums, I could just, I could flip over a bucket and make that happen. So.
Yeah, right. Wait, okay. It's funny. I'm just trying to piece together all this time between the drumming and when I discovered you as a singer, because I literally never thought about
I never thought of me singing. That was never part of the thing. Me singing happened because progressively it got less. I got more and more frustrated with the lack of capacity to contribute to the music. Yeah. All I wanted to do, the only reason I wanted to be in bands was to be part of writing the music and part of there's something about when I was a little kid, I got a tape recorder from my grandparents, this little blue tape recorder, and it blew my mind that I could take that tape recorder and take my mom's tape recorder, I'd borrow my mom's, and I would press record, I'd press record, sing into it, and then I could play it back on the other one and press record, and I could start layering things. Yeah. And it was
amazing.
It was the coolest thing, and it was so exciting.
I had a similar.
I think we've all done that. It's the coolest thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was such a eye-opening thing, you're playing with harmonies, and that was really what composition was to me, was the idea of I can layer these things together, and so it was kind of interwoven with recording to me.
It's cool.
But I was in bands and they wouldn't let me do it. Right. It's like it was this thing. It's the silliest thing. I don't know where it comes from. Even though all the drummers that I know are the most musically capable people I know, but they're like, oh well, drummers aren't musicians. I
think that especially in the late '90s and stuff, there was that stigma about drummers. I don't know if it's true so much anymore. But I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, wow, what a weird thing it was, though. It was this big cultural thing. It was almost like, the dumb blonde jokes, where it was the drummer jokes.
Absolutely.
It was like this stereotype that came out of nowhere where you're like, what? the guy that has the most limb independence? I don't know.
Right.
It's weird. At least the thing I've noticed coming from the metal world is drummers have gotten a lot better. So I do think they're respected a lot more. I remember maybe when I started recording professionally in 2002 or 3, just getting someone to play to a click was like I was asking them to hurt a family member or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, people used to get so offended about it. It's such a, especially I think it's something like metal where it's part of the weight of it is how much everything's landing on exactly that same rhythm, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's really funny. And there's also stylistic choices. I remember recording with a guy when I was a drummer, and when we were listening back, he had my kick just almost inaudible, and it was kind of like a skate punk band, right? And my kick drum was just not there, and I'm like, this is 90% of this band, right? Is that one instrument? He's he's like, well, you didn't use very many dynamics, and I'm like, come on, man.
Turn the fader off.
Exactly. But yeah, no. But anyway, but the click thing, that's one of those ones that I learned a lot about that on working on Take This to Your Grave was the way you can groove within a click.
Absolutely.
Is that that's almost, it's funny, people will be like, oh, I don't need a click, I mean, you can't feel the beat, and it's no, it's harder, I think, to feel the beat within the click, to feel your groove within a click. I mean, that's it's hard, it's tough, it's
Plus, this is a big one, I think. You can program clicks to speed up and slow down.
Yeah.
So,
which I do all the time, depending on what it is. But yes, you can, and it's like.
So there's no reason not to.
Yeah, it's a very I guess maybe in the days of because I know we're all old enough to have dealt with tape and probably had a recording where we had to record a metronome track.
Yep.
So if you've ever done that, and if you've ever done that, then you know that you couldn't program that. But,
True.
But otherwise,
I got to give the story then of when I discovered you were a singer, because so from that gap of when I guess you're 14 to when was that?
I was about 17, so it was really about 3 years from the time we met to the time.
Still in high school.
Yeah, I was still very much in high school, and so the background was I just got sick and tired of no one letting me write songs, and that was the only reason I even tried to sing.
So did you have songs written, or were you just okay?
Oh yeah.
I had written. I was always writing, and it's also one of those things where in high school I think everyone writes poetry of some kind, and then I grew out of that very much. But that made it easy. But it was always about the composition. It was always about I really want the syncopation of what this guitar is doing against this bass line. That kind of stuff was always what I wanted to do, and no one would let me have any say in that unless I sang it.
It's interesting how then Fall Out Boy essentially became like the first real time for you to basically like explode with those ideas, right?
Yeah, because no one would really let me.
I didn't really get to. Like I said, I got better as a drummer, so I was getting in better and better bands. And people would, seek me out to be in bands, but they still wouldn't let me. Yeah, interesting.
I still couldn't write anything.
Okay, so this is how I remember it, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because it could be wrong. But so fast forwarding the few years, right? And I'm making a record for our friend's band called Knockout.
Yes,
Damar, who's now in the TVs, was in Knockout.
Damar, the great drummer.
The great drummer, yeah. And Knockout had just been signed to an indie label, and this was like the first real quote unquote record I had ever made.
And by the way, also it's kind of this thing that gets forgotten in the annals of history. That was the first of any of our friends' bands to like get a deal like somewhere. That was like a really big thing for a huge moment. This band Knockout,
Fearless Records.
Fearless.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and it was a huge thing because we were all in this playing these basement shows and all this
for
stuff.
For all of us, for every single, for all of these little bands, that was like a big thing.
So just
big
out
moment.
of curiosity, just not to derail you, I'm just curious about this. So when your friend's band got signed back then, and it was that big of a deal, like you guys are saying, did your local scene support them or hate them?
Well, the weird thing about that scene was it wasn't really coalesced enough. It was this kind of thing that flew under the radar. So it was the funniest thing. In Chicago, we had this scene that supported itself very much, but it was really pretty small.
Yeah.
And when we would go to play shows at, Fireside or, if any of us got lucky enough to play Metro or whatever, you were really playing with Midwestern emo bands, like really noodly, really technical emo bands, old style emo, or you were playing with like Fat Records pop punk bands, and there was a really solid scene of those kinds of bands, and they hated all of this stuff. None of those bands wanted anything to do with us. So it was really kind of a lot of these misfit bands that it was kind of pop punk, but then we all kind of came out of there were kind of semi-hardcore bands in there too, and semi-ska bands. You were in a ska band, like
totally,
it was all this kind of like basically any of the bands that couldn't get arrested in the old-fashioned emo thing or in the Fat Records pop punk thing. We all kind of came together, So it was a very supportive scene. I think after. I would assume later it became not as supportive, but at the time this was a big deal for all of us.
It was really cool. Yeah. And it was like, okay. So a few years later, Knockout got signed. I'm making the record. And I'm making it at my little studio that we're doing all these records at and where I met Patrick. And during the course of that record, Pete, who I knew and was friends with the band, was hanging out during those sessions. and this is the part I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I'm curious if I'm wrong. Pete would he would come by and he'd go, "Hey, Sean, I've started a new band," and I think he even referred to it as it's kind of a joke band.
It was a joke band. Yeah, we were very much a joke band.
Okay, right. Okay. Making sure. Yeah, and he was like, "It's kind of a joke," but he goes,
"Well, because Pete was formerly in Army Angelus, and they were touring with like Hatebreed and stuff. It was like a real band. So like it would have been stupid at the time to leave that band for some silly pop punk band. It just didn't really. It was more of a thing he was doing for fun.
Interesting.
And whatever.
So I remember he had a cassette and he's like, "I got demos. Would you listen to them and consider recording us?" And he goes, "Patrick is the singer." And I go, "Patrick's the singer?" and he's like, "Yeah." And so this was during the course of me making my first record for a label. You know, I'm working 20 hours a day or whatever. And I didn't listen to it. And Pete would come back and he'd be like, "You listen to that demo?" I was like, "I haven't listened to it yet." Like, "You listen to that demo?" "I haven't listened to it yet." And then one day we're doing background vocals for the Knockout record. It's in the afternoon, and Jeff, the singer, I assume it was Jeff or one of the guys, says, "We're going to have Patrick come by, and he's going to do harmonies on one song." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I've heard Patrick's like a singer." Like, all right, cool.
Did you have that feeling you get sometimes when you hear that a member of a band's going to do some vocals, and it's like, fuck, kind of gotta get.
You know what? I can confirm that he did.
Yeah, gotta get
because I walked into the booth and it was very much because also context. You got to understand. Sean had only ever recorded me when I was the okay drummer. I was also 14 at the time when I recorded, and I was the okay drummer in a not so good band.
Right.
So that's all he knew about me. He had no reason to think I was going to do anything but suck in there.
Which probably made for even a better like turnout of the story because so I remember Patrick coming in, and before you even went in the booth, I think we were talking about getting food, like Subway. I think Subway, and if I can say that, and we were making an order, and I remember you specifically going, "I'm hungry, but I don't want to eat until after I'm done singing."
Yes, this is true.
Okay, good. I'm glad because I've told this story a few times.
Yes, so that's 100% true.
and I was like, all right. And so Patrick goes in to do harmonies on
one song. It was just going to be one background thing.
And like, in my memory, killed it. And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." And I was like, holy shit. Not only, I was like, you sound awesome, but I was like, these harmonies are great. And just in like Patrick's like nature of harmony and melody, he's like pumping them out. And the guys in the band, I think were like a lot of bands were not so, that wasn't their forte, was doing harmonies, right? And so we had this whole record
they had this harmonic thing, but none of them were really harmony singers. So there was a lot of they had like all of them could sing, I think, but none of them really. Yeah. But all of them kind of were like the lead singer.
Meanwhile, you had spent all this time in secret developing harmonies and layering stuff.
Yeah, with my tape recorder.
And so boom, so this comes out, and all of a sudden, it's like, to me, it's like holy shit! All of a sudden, this now sounds like a record that I'm used to hear. You know, like this is the final layer, and I just remember I remember it as, I was like, that's it. I was like, you're doing the rest of these songs. Or like one more. Or I was like, we need you on another.
Yes.
Something like that. And you're like,
and it was like all night. And I didn't eat for...
It went on. I had Patrick do harmonies on, I'm pretty sure it's like 9 or 10 out of the 11 songs on that record, if not all of them.
In one sitting, and I didn't eat until we were done.
That was the best part, is the guy's freaking starving.
Yeah. It was okay though.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
Well, and the thing is too, I mean, for me, that was like the coolest thing, because all I wanted was to have some capacity to influence the harmonic structure of music. Like that, I was never, I never wanted to be the lead guitar player. I never wanted to be the star of a thing. But when I was playing drums, I didn't get to be any part. Like a bass player can change the, change it from the root to a suspension, right? And that's that's so much power that a bass player has, right? A drummer, you can change a lot, but you never really impact the harmony, the harmonic structure. Yeah. And that was like the coolest thing for me, like someone was finally letting me do that, and I was like, sure, I'll stay here all night. I think my mom was like, where are you?
That's great.
It's interesting. I just wanted to say, you've been talking about harmonic structure a lot. One of the things that I wanted to talk about just in my notes was about melody writing, and obviously without great harmonic movement and structure and getting that right, there's not going to be a good melody that can come of it. So was that the goal?
Oh, yeah. And it's so funny because I feel like, I know you know this. I know we all know this because we all work in music and it's like, beating your head against a wall. No one, even on the periphery, ever gets that. It's always like melody, melody, melody. And you're like, the melody is the least important thing, really. I mean, at the end of the day, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but the melody is entirely dependent on what's happening around
100%.
it. And even what's implied. So even if you have I was thinking of that Zombies song where it starts off and it's just a lead vocal solo. It's so much of what makes that vocal work, even though it's a solo vocal, is the implied harmonics of what's happening,
Totally.
what you're being led to believe the chord structure is what moves it. So without the harmony, the melody means nothing to me. And that's always one of the things that I get really frustrated with is it's one of the reasons why I kind of quit the songwriter for hire thing, because when you're in a songwriting session, you're with somebody else and I'm like, what are the hard things to do? I think the hardest thing is to find the lyric, because that's, especially in pop songs, that's the thing everyone walks away remembering. That's the hard part, really. The groove, that's like that's the other thing. If there are songs, terrible songs, that have a good lyric and a good groove and everything else is awful.
Oh, yeah. Just go to any
that
club.
work. The very successful songs that have a great groove and a really solid lyric and garbage everything else, right? So you're already most of the way there. But every time people be like, melody, and they start humming or something, I'm like, don't do that. Don't even be tempted to do that. Figure out the rest of it first. And then it's almost like writing dialogue. I read a screenwriting book one time and they talked about like dialogue's the fun part, do that last, because that's the hard part. You have to earn that kind of when you're working on it. It's like, that you can write the dialogue, that you have to build the story first. You have to build you have to build the framework of what your characters are going to be interacting in. And that's how I think about melody, is like, melody is the fun part. Get to that last, because if you don't have the backbone of the song, your melody doesn't matter at all,
That's awesome.
You can just, not to trivialize great melodies, but that's the part that you can improvise and emote and get inspired over. But you're right, without setting the stage for it, it's nothing. And it's the same, not just with vocals, with like great guitar solos. Like that Hotel California solo would not be what it is without that harmonic movement.
No question. And I think that's one of the things. I also think it's a problem as a singer with vocals, is that people don't really tend to think of vocals as an instrument. Don't tend to think of it in terms of what it's doing melodically within a harmonic structure. Even when I started, I found myself. I was on a record with Neil Avron, who produced us after we worked with Sean, and I was in the booth for something. And there was a passing note. I can't remember. It was just in between, two notes. I had this little run. And he's like, well, what note is that? What note are you trying to hit there? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, you should know. Yeah. You should have a plan for everything your voice is doing should be a note. It shouldn't be, even if you're doing some sort of portamento thing, you should still know exactly where you're starting and where you're ending.
It's interesting how a lot of singers sometimes don't know that, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but
they really don't.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like sometimes if I'll be in the studio with a singer who's having a hard time, I'll ask like, can you play that on the piano? Do you know that melody? And sometimes it'll take them a while to find it, and I think, but it's cool. I've seen times when they do find it and they make some connection. It's like, oh, holy cow!
Oh, yeah.
These are just like
no. It's a huge part of it. In fact, on "Take This to Your Grave," there's a moment. Maybe it's on "Where's Your Boy." I would love for it to be on "Where's Your Boy," because that was such a landmark song for us as in recording. But where there was a harmony that I was working on, and I kept kind of singing it out, and you're like, it was a 3-part harmony. And my first part layered really well, but then my second part, I kept going into this kind of rubby seventh or something, or a unison somewhere. I can't remember what it was. And you said, Patrick, go figure it out and try it.
By rubby, do you mean that it kind of just hits you the wrong way?
Yeah, it just there was
something doesn't jive.
Yeah,
with it. Yeah.
It was just rubbing wrong. It was just sounding wrong together. And you were like, go sit at the piano and figure out in triads. You know, what are you playing in all the vocal parts? And I was like, this. It was something like that, where it was a seventh or a ninth that when you sang it as a melody, because I was thinking of it as a lead part, or whatever, when you sing it as a melody, it sounded really cool against the chord structure, but with what's already happening in the, I think it created, you know what it was? I do remember this, whatever it was, it created a minor second in something the guitar was doing.
Yeah, is that right?
And so it was like, well, just don't do that.
Yeah. Let's just not do that.
Let's just not do that. But,
So you said you were untrained, but obviously you're not untrained. Where did you pick that up?
Just kind of watching and listening. And I have kind of studied a lot, especially since I was doing the scoring thing. You kind of can't, even though I know a lot of guys who get away with it just with, this is, I wrote it in Logic and this is what the thing is. You still, you hire strings and they have questions that.
Yes, they do.
That you can't really answer if you don't really know, what you're talking about. So I have had to study a lot. I probably learned more about the terminology for music theory in the past, 3 years than I did the entire time I was, working on records.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's still one of those things too where a lot of it makes sense. That's the thing I think that's scary for a lot of people about music theory is that like it sounds so strange and scary, but then you're like, no. I mean, it's like Howard Hanson's concept of dissonance and consonance, where it's like dissonance are just the ones that sound funny next to each other. That's all it is. And sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. That's all it is that,
Yep.
and you know that implicitly. Everyone knows that. When you hear, even if you don't really understand music, that, like the Twilight Zone theme, that those notes are rubbing against each other. Mm-hmm. That's the intended effect. That's what it sounds like,
I think also people are afraid of it because there's this myth that it's going to rob them of their creativity.
Yeah.
I think that's a big
total
one.
bullshit.
You'll lose the innocence.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of those things that, I have a lot of Berkeley friends and they would always tell me, oh, you don't want to learn this stuff. It's just going to ruin you. You're never going to know how to write and all this other stuff. And it's such nonsense. Yeah. I really think it is because to me, I'm like, if anything, the more I learn, the more I'm like, oh, it's just a shortcut to what you hear in your head where you're like, and you can dissect records in a way where you're like, or dissect music in a way where you're like, oh, I thought he was doing this. This is what they're actually doing. Like when these little things harmonically where you're like, that's the purpose of this chord. That's the purpose of this rhythm. Even things like I was reading the other day about micro rhythms, and it's all these things that we do without thinking about. Where the snare's late on the whatever. You do these things implicitly, but when you have some sort of nomenclature for it, some sort of language for it, you're like, oh, I know how to communicate this now.
I mean, it makes sense. It's like if you found something in your creative flow that starts to work for you, and even if you don't fully understand it, it makes sense that it's easy to become scared of losing that.
Yeah.
It's like if I learn this, I'm totally scared. Like I'm gonna lose what's good.
It.
But yeah, totally. And I think that it is often, I find it to be often it's true that when you learn something, you just get better. It's like,
of course.
but like,
of course you do.
Wow.
What an idea.
My take on it is that, because I went to Berkeley, I know those people that are like harmonic wizards who write total garbage. Like most of the instructors, the funniest thing was at an arranging class, the teacher who was just like a walking encyclopedia of arrangement theory, all that stuff. She played us her music because she just got it recorded, and it was like the worst thing I've ever heard. But my take is that they weren't going to write good stuff anyways. It's independent of each other. Harmonic knowledge and talent for writing they're two independent variables, and if you put them together, like someone that is a good writer and they know their shit, that's awesome.
Absolutely. Well,
but it's not one or the other.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. My brother has he hasn't really carried on with a particular interest in music, but he's a very gifted writer. When we were kids, he's about 5 years older than me, and when we were kids, he would sit there and plunk out these songs. And one of his best buddies ended up teaching theory at Yale. And he was so frustrated with, like, this is a guy who spent his whole life, devoted it to music and the study of it. And my brother would sit at a piano and just not really thinking, just plunk out something really catchy and really you would find yourself humming. And he's like, how do you do that? You know, his friends like, how do you do that? That's ridiculous. And my brother's like, I don't know, you know. But there is an innate thing where some people, I think, you just write or you just compose or whatever. And I think it's a funny thing too, where it's like you said, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but one doesn't necessarily guarantee the other, you know?
No, absolutely not. And I don't think, though, that getting good at one is going to negate the other.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Absolutely. Like you said, the more you learn, the better
the
you
more
get.
you know.
Well, not to mention, I also think that there's a certain degree of snobbery that I'm guilty of too sometimes, where you think of somebody who isn't trained as not being capable of writing, and then you're disproven about that all the time. I mean, some people just write really great songs without having really any clue what they're doing, you know?
Yeah.
So
totally, yeah.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying this podcast, then you should know that it's brought to you by URM Academy. URM Academy's mission is to create the next generation of audio professionals by giving them the inspiration and information to hone their craft and build a career doing what they love. You've probably heard me talk about Nail the Mix before, and if you're a member, you already know how amazing it is. At the beginning of the month, Nail the Mix members get the raw multi-tracks to a new song by artists like Lamb of God, Opeth, Meshuggah, Bring Me the Horizon, Gojira, Asking Alexandria, Machine Head, and Papa Roach, among many, many others. Then at the end of the month, the producer who mixed it comes on and does a live streaming walkthrough of exactly how they mixed the song of the album and takes your questions live on the air. You'll also get access to MixLab, our collection of dozens of bite-sized mixing tutorials that cover all the basics, and Portfolio Builder, which is a library of pro-quality multi-tracks cleared for use in your portfolio, so your career will never again be held back by the quality of your source material. And for those who really, really want to step up their game, we have another membership tier called URM Enhanced, which includes everything I already told you about and access to our massive library of fast tracks, which are deep, super detailed courses on intermediate and advanced topics like gain staging, mastering, low-end, and so forth. It's over 50 hours of content, and man, let me tell you, this stuff is just insanely detailed. Enhanced members also get access to one-on-one office hours, sessions with us, and Mix Rescue, which is where we open up one of your mixes on a live video stream, fix it up, and talk you through exactly what we're doing at every step. If any of that sounds interesting to you, if you're ready to level up your mixing skills and your audio career, head over to urm.academy/enhanced to find out more. I just went to Denmark, for the last Nail the Mix, and the guy that we worked with, his name's Jacob Hansen, great producer, great mixer. He does all this European metal stuff, and we did a class about mixing orchestra with metal, and we were using the newest Flesh God Apocalypse, which is like one of the most extreme bands on the planet, but the guy in the band that writes the orchestration is a legitimate orchestrator. Jacob, who was the instructor and the mixer, knows zero about theory, orchestration, yet the mix is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. So I totally do think whether it's a writer or a producer or mixer, you don't have to know that stuff. Like what's most important is how you hear it in your head and whether or not you can translate it. But if you do want to communicate with string players, if you want to communicate with an orchestra, you better speak their language.
Well, especially when that's the thing is when it's a couple buddies in a basement or whatever, it's easy to use, shorthand. But when there's 70 players that are they're on a schedule, they don't have any vested interest in what you're doing. Yeah. They don't care. That's one of the things that is really funny when you record strings or choir or something. Really quickly you learn like, oh, this is a job. They're here to work. They don't care about your song. They're not
interesting. Yeah.
You tell them what they need to do and they're going to do it, and then the second that clock is up, they're out of the room.
Right.
So yeah, definitely it helps to know what you're talking about.
So back to talking about when you shocked him with vocals.
Right.
how did you get them? You said you were having trouble getting people to take you seriously enough to let you do any vocals. How did you get them to let you do vocals in the first place, to where anyone even recommended it to them?
Well, so I've told this story a lot, so I'll try not to give the canned version, but the band, basically, Pete and Joe had wanted to start a pop punk band or something melodic, something more fun, because they had been they were doing exclusively really heavy bands, and that was all they did. And they just wanted to play around with something, fun. And my last band had broken up, and there had been a pretty long drought. I was kind of surprised. Usually it was pretty easy for me to get into bands, and I would audition for stuff and get something, whatever. And there was this kind of, I can't remember how long it was, but in teenage terms, it felt like eons,
mm-hmm.
where no one was really letting me play in their band or whatever. And I bumped into Joe, and he was talking about Pete Wentz, and that they were putting together a band. I'm like, Wentz, like, he's like in real bands that like tour and stuff, like. And I was like, well, I want to see what that is. I want to see what the vibe is. And Joe had said they're looking for a guitar player, a singer, and a drummer. That's right at the point it was just Pete and Joe. And I'm like, and I was kind of bluffing because I'd only ever played drums in bands, but I was like, I could do one of those, I'm sure, in a pop punk band, sure, whatever. Yeah. I was being kind of arrogant because I didn't take pop punk very seriously. I'm like, sure, whatever. One of those I'm sure I could do. And but I went in kind of with an agenda of like, I'm going to play my song. I'm going to play a couple songs for them, and and see if I can get them to take my songs, because that's all I really wanted. I wanted to make songs and make music, really. And but I had my kit set up in the corner, knowing that was what was going to be the thing. They come over, I play them a couple songs, and it wasn't even in my mind to even consider being a singer. At most, I was like, well, I could be the rhythm guitar player, and who does maybe backups or something. But that was never even a thought of mine.
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
And I play a couple songs, and they lean over to each other, and Pete goes, I think this guy should sing. And Joe had told him that, by the way. Joe had heard something I had done. I posted some song somewhere. Again, I think I was trying to just get people to let me write songs, and I posted on like mp3.com or something, whatever, a song that I had written or something. And Joe had heard that, and he's like, oh, this guy can sing. They knew before I did, and it was kind of like, you should sing. And I'm like, what'd you think of the song? Whatever. Right. And it really started from there. So it was kind of, I mean, it's really like one of those, those Disney movies from the 90s where like the kid had no clue.
Yeah.
Like where you just find out that you can throw the football really far. It was just one of those things. I had no idea. It wasn't. And the other thing too that's weird to me is I didn't know that wasn't a thing everyone could do. I had no...
Sing?
Yeah, I had no idea.
Right.
I hadn't really had a lot of experience with other people singing, so I didn't know that it was... I thought everyone could sing to some degree,
If only that were true.
Yeah, now I understand. But I just didn't... I had never experienced people singing really badly, I guess. I don't know. And so I didn't know and I also kind of had the blind luck of being a drummer, so my rhythm was pretty good. So I could do a lot of that. And that was the other thing too, is because I was a drummer, then we're doing all these stacked harmonies and they were lining up really well,
Yeah, which is huge.
Yeah.
So was it a major relief for you? Like, went in there and knocked it out, and you're like,
when he did those background vocals?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. Yeah, it was a relief for the record I was working on, because it made the record better. It made me feel like I looked better, because like I had this like extra element in the record, like my ego or whatever. And
Sean was amazing at record. I can't stress enough, like, for what we had to work with, it was pretty magical going into Sean's studio. I still listen to those records, and I'm like, or I listen back on those, I'm like, it's crazy how we pulled this together. Now, this was a long time ago. So now it would be fairly easy to make a record sound like that. At the time, it was a lot of work, and I was very impressed with, like, I'm still impressed with how good we made those records sound.
I am too, actually. Yeah. I think it's just like, I think back to that, it just has to be we were just totally determined, basically, and like had an endless amount of energy, and yeah.
We're talking about youthful energy. I remember those days of I can't do it anymore, but like 36-hour long sessions, just going for it.
Oh man, yeah, no, we did all of that, and that was the other thing too. Is I think Sean and I both had this like kid in a candy store kind of thing where when you have an excuse to like stay up till 6 in the morning working on, like I remember the feedback. We spent fucking hours on just like
I'm starting to
on
remember.
the feedback. There's this somewhere on Take This to Your Grave. I think it's between two songs. There's this like feedback that goes on for like 30 or 40 seconds.
Yeah.
We could not have spent more time, getting that just so, we want to, because there's layers of it where, and then it plays across the stereo field where one comes in on the right and then one comes in on the left, and there's one that comes down the middle, and we're like, no, that's too soon. That one should come here. And we, and I think we actually were going in and we couldn't, I don't think we had Melodyne or anything at the time, but we were going in and trying to tune them like by like, we were trying to get it to work, and so if it wasn't making exactly the right note, then we would go back and record me standing a little bit further from the amp or whatever. We really, and it's this thing that no one cares about.
Yeah, no one cares about now.
Ever. No one cared about it then, but
or then.
even in the band, we showed it to the band, and they're like, cool. Yeah. But the two of us were like, oh man,
we spent all night. Yeah. It's funny, yeah. Actually, totally randomly, I was driving the other day in my iTunes, like in my car. If I like just get in, sometimes it just shuffles iTunes or whatever, and that song came on from Take This to Your Grave, and I listened through, and I hadn't heard it in forever, and I was like, and then in the end happened with that feedback, and I had completely forgotten we did it, which is so funny because other than that happening a few weeks ago, I haven't heard that probably in 15 years. And I do remember thinking like, that's like pretty like orchestrated or something.
We worked so hard on that damn feedback.
That's pretty good.
But yeah, it's those kind of things, I mean, we were just not teenagers. I think I still was actually.
You were a teenager,
But like, so, you have that thing, and like, there's also that thing where when you're the kind of person that wants to be in a studio and you have an excuse to be in a studio, it's like, we're gonna.
It's a really cool thing.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. Like you were sleeping there for a while.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Totally.
Like,
all right. Yeah. So I have along these lines. This is maybe my all-time one of my favorite stories. And I think I've maybe told it once before publicly. Okay, so when we were making the record, and again, you have to stop me if this is wrong because this is how I remember it.
Check it out. Yeah.
So when we were making the record, we were up at like a Smart Studios, a nice like full blown recording studio, cutting like the rhythm section or guitars, I think drums and guitars, and we did your scratch vocal there.
Yes,
and we cut those guitars to tape. We were on a tape machine, and they have a super fancy mic collection. They had a Neumann U47, a $10,000 microphone. Okay, yeah.
Which I asked if we could record on. They're like, no, you can't.
Denied.
They let us see it. They let us see it. But.
And I thought, okay, so maybe this is wrong, but I thought we did a scratch vocal. They had a 251 that we couldn't record at. That was and they had. And I'm pretty sure we did a scratch vocal on their 47 to the tape machine just as a guide vocal. No?
Okay. I thought they told us we couldn't use the 47 because the capsules degrade over time.
That's the 251.
The 47 does too.
No, totally. Yeah. I meant like because other times I brought bands up there, the 251 was always the one off limits because it was Shirley's mic.
Yes. So yeah. But I thought the 47 wasn't that like Kurt's mic or something? Wasn't that the deal?
That's the 251.
That is the 251. Yeah. Okay, so we were allowed to use the 47 then.
And I'm certain only because I've used it on many other occasions, but also if we didn't, this whole story goes to shit.
Wait, so was it an upcharge to use?
No.
So because Garbage owned the studio, and they had this 251 that was used on In Utero, and then it became Shirley Manson's mic. It was like her vocal mic for everything. It was a 251. You're right.
That's totally the one.
So it was her 251.
It was her 251.
It was Shirley's.
and you could look at it in the basement. They would show it to you,
right.
but you're not allowed to use it.
Totally.
Anyway.
Okay, so we used the 47. We settled for the 47.
Oh, we settled for the 47.
Right, and so Patrick does some guide vocal, scratch vocals on the 47, basically. So we had a vocal or whatever. Okay, so the plan was to do the guitars and bass at Smart, and then because we didn't have enough money to stay there and do all the vocals and the rest of the overdubs, we went back to my little studio where Patrick and I met. It was just this little place. At that point, I had Pro Tools, but and we were doing. The plan was do his lead vocals, background vocals, and all the other stuff until we mixed it, right? And I remember we go to do Patrick's lead, and I don't have a 47, right? I forget what it was at the time, but probably a $1,000 microphone at the most. And we're recording to kind of primitive Pro Tools, but and at one point we needed to reference your scratch vocal and for a part or something like that, and we pull it up, and I remember thinking, holy shit, the scratch vocal sounds so much better sonically. And I think I was like, do you guys hear this? And you and Pete were there, and I remember you guys being like, oh, it sounds like way better. Like, what's wrong with your studio, Keith? You know, I was like, nah, fuck. Like, well, I don't have this microphone. We don't have it in the budget to have this microphone.
Well, yeah, we didn't have any budget at the time, you know.
And so the solution that I thought of at the time was, okay, I was like an intern at a larger recording studio that we were going to mix it at in Chicago called Gravity Studios, which was another nice studio. It was about 45 minutes away. And because I was an intern and then I did a lot of work there, I still had a set of keys. And I was like, well, Gravity has a 47. and that's right. Also, it was... scratch vocal was the 47, and it was done to the tape machine. So I think in my head, and with a knee pre or something. So
it was great.
It was like that's
the scratch vocal chain.
No, it was
right.
ridiculous.
And it's like, how do we get to that? And so the thought was, I remember thinking, well, we don't have money to go to Gravity, but here's what we could do. Everyone's probably gone from Gravity every night at 1 or 2 in the morning, and so we can get in the car. We can, mind you, this is January in Chicago, so we're talking like 0 degrees, and we can get in the car and drive down to Gravity at 2 a.m., sneak into the studio, not tell anybody, and record your lead vocals from like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. before they get back, and we can do that like 3 days in a row, and seemingly we'll get away with it, and we'll get this vocal chain. Yes. But it was, Patrick, you need to sing your lead vocals from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the dead of winter on a tape machine with X amount of tracks. And we had the rest of the rhythm section on the track. So it was like maybe 3 tracks. Basically, the worst conditions you could give any singer.
Well, and so it's funny, this session, so the funny thing about Take This to Your Grave, because, the way that it ended up happening was we had gotten, long story, but we had gotten... like money to do 3 songs as a demo at Smart. So we did get to go to Smart and record these 3 songs, and that ended up being, there's 3 of the songs on the record. We shopped that demo around, and there was some interest, but everyone was basically like, well, we don't know if you can write more songs. What can you write? So we go back, and with our own money, which was none, we record 2 more songs. I don't remember which was the one of them, but the other, it was Grenade Jumper and Grenade Jumper and Where's Your Boy?
Yeah.
And that was this session, was these 2 songs that so we're sneaking into Gravity
funny.
late at night, it was funny, man. Like the Gravity wasn't by any means in a bad area, but it wasn't a great area.
No, and it was before Wicker Park.
Everything gets a little worse at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing too.
Yeah, definitely.
And our van broke down. And it was kind of also one of these things where like the van didn't really fully lock or anything like that. So somebody had to stand guard of the van.
That's right.
Outside in the middle of winter in Chicago.
0 degrees.
Yeah, 0 degrees. And man, the stuff you see at 4 in the morning on North Avenue.
North Avenue in Wicker Park in like 2002.
Yeah, 2002. Yeah.
North Avenue in Atlanta, which is where I live, also in that time period was shady.
Yeah,
There's something
yeah, no,
about
say North Avenue. Go figure. It's universal.
Right. So were those those two songs were kind of like prove yourself?
Yeah,
So
and
you had to do whatever it took to.
yeah. And so it was basically, beg, borrow, steal, make this thing sound good. And we did, and it worked. And Where's Your Boy? That was basically because we had that and we had the song Dead on Arrival. And those two songs kind of convinced ultimately Fuel by Ramen, like, okay, we'll sign you. So, but the record wasn't made as one album. We had those 5 songs recorded. And
in two different, two different,
like 6 or 8 months apart.
Yeah.
And then it was, okay, here's budget. Now, real budget. We did have real budget, but here's real budget to go and record 7 more songs at Smart. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's funny how that works because I'll often get asked, by people like, oh, is it okay if we split up the drums like this week and then we do drums for a record this week? And like people who might be Fall Out Boy fans, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, can you tell that? Can you pinpoint which songs in Take This to Your Grave were done in this period, and this period, because they were done in 3 totally different sections
and parts. So funny, not so funny story. I don't know if you want me to tell this story. Kind of a bummer.
No, I do. Yeah,
kind of a bummer. But I think it was an intern for you. Like formatted his drives.
Oh yeah,
and
I'd forgotten this.
And he lost a lot of stuff. Lost entire projects for his studio.
Yeah,
lost most of the files for the 3 songs we recorded. You went to a recovery place, and there were some things that you couldn't recover, but you did get. And again, a lot of this was to tape, but we were backing it up on the and some of the stuff, a lot of the harmonies and stuff, we did not have on tape.
Yeah, we wound up in Pro Tools.
And so some of the we ended up saving some of the guitars and things like that, but there were some of the harmony vocals that we had to go back and re-record like a year later.
And you redid it. You just redid them.
Yeah.
It's funny, until you mentioned that the other day, I had totally forgotten about that.
I remembered because I was so bummed.
That sounds traumatic.
Well, what was the scariest thing ever? For both of us, because I mean, for me, I'm like, this is my baby. This is the stuff that I worked on.
And a huge opportunity.
Yeah, totally. And then for Sean, like, I was like, because the way you described it, it was like, I think I'm going to lose everything. It was basically like, I mean, it's the scary.
It's the last thing.
It's the scariest thing. And he formatted both of them. That was the other thing. He formatted the main and the backup. That was the thing. And so
I'm impressed. I was even backing up in those days.
I remember. I remember because you were like, dude, and the backup.
Wow.
It was
holy cow.
It was the scariest thing. Like, whatever.
Yeah. Did it just happen to be that moment where you have both hooked up at the same time? Like,
I honestly don't know.
That hour.
I really don't know.
That magic hour.
I don't know.
That's
my memory.
Traumatic.
Yeah. I'm sorry to bring it up.
No, now it doesn't matter anymore,
But it was such a scary time, to be like, and for us, we're like, we have a deadline to make for this album, for our first album.
Yeah.
So now we have to, and we don't know how much we lost. We have no idea. There's this story about Toy Story 2. That this is actually exactly what happened to Toy Story 2.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's true story that Toy Story 2, somebody erased all of the hard drives, and by chance, and whatever, and it was like almost completed, and by chance, someone in the sound department or something had it on their laptop, had a copy on their laptop that they weren't supposed to have, but like to make things easier
So
or whatever.
Did he get fired or rewarded?
They ended up, they saved the entire film or whatever. But it kind of felt like that, where like for a minute there, you're like, I think we lost the whole thing. I think I don't know what we lost. And so
that is so brutal. I once in 2005, my studio got struck by lightning.
Oh my gosh!
While I was backing things up, so this was before cloud backup. So I had the main drive, the backup drive, and the computer, all hooked up at the same time, and heard a storm start brewing. And in the South, lightning is a real issue. So I was like, well, there's 3 minutes left on the backup. The moment this backup is done, I'm pulling everything out of the walls. Well, like at 2 minutes, the place got struck by lightning.
Oh my gosh.
And when I say everything exploded, I mean, it exploded.
Really?
And, and everything was gone. Luckily.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was so bad. But one of the bands was there with me, so they believed me, obviously, because they saw it happen.
Fair enough.
So we just re-recorded their stuff. But the other bands did not believe me because, you know.
Yeah.
It's one
Why
of those,
would you?
Yeah.
My studio got struck by lightning.
Yeah. I lost your whole record.
Okay.
Yeah. They definitely did not believe me.
Right. Dog, get your check.
Right.
Do you use cloud backups now?
Yeah, Backblaze. Yeah,
Backblaze. I'm not
It's
familiar
my
with that
cloud.
one.
I've heard that one. A lot of people are using that now.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Gotta do it, boys and girls.
Yeah,
please.
no.
Right. Yeah, you do.
Back up
You do.
everything. But yeah, it was a very scary time working on the record. But anyway, the point is that you can record years apart and have a cohesive sounding song.
Yeah, I mean somehow we did, which was kind of amazing. I think.
Well, did you remix everything at the very end?
No. So actually, that's interesting. And again, this is you correct me if I'm wrong here, but pretty sure this is right. So we made obviously we made the whole record. These guys had a tour that was scheduled like immediately after the recording. We finished recording, right? And so meaning I had to mix the record while they were gone, or I had to mix the rest of the record. These 7 songs. We had 5 that were done.
We were done for a long time.
Yeah.
Again, another like 8 months or so they were done.
Yeah, and so and the plan was I'm going to mix the other 7, and I think my plan was I'm going to remix at least a few of the original ones we did, like Dead on Arrival and Saturday and maybe one other, and
Homesick at Space Camp.
Yeah, and I wanted to top my mix. I remember that was my thought. But okay, but the trick is that I'm mixing at Gravity, which is at that time it's a vintage Neve, and there's no recall of any kind. The band's on tour, and so I'm left to mix the record and make every print on my own. And then I had to play it for these guys when they got back from tour, which is maybe like the most amount of anxiety I've ever had as a mixer, because here I'm trying to mix this their debut record. It was a big deal for me for sure, and I knew it was for them, and there was no going back. And so I mixed those 7 songs by myself, and this is pre internet speeds of being able to send it to them and they can none of that. And so I did mix the 7 songs, and I was there, like you would expect, all night pulling my hair out doing this crap. And then I tried to remix a few of the old ones, and I actually remember thinking, I can't beat this. I'm leaving this. This was okay. And I think also I was beyond exhausted and had used most of my time to mix the other 7.
We were happy with. I mean, those were the things that got assigned. So there's no real reason to, it wasn't broke.
It's it's like my ego. It's like I can beat this shit. And so I didn't do that. But so the funny part about that is that I printed them, and you guys, they came back, and I remember you guys coming into Gravity, me playing you the mixes, and I was like, I mean, these are my buddies. It's like I'm friends with them, but still I'm really nervous. I'm probably feeling like I'm going to throw up because I'm playing for, they're...
Well, because the stakes for all of us were really high. I mean,
high.
It was an indie label, but it was kind of overseen by a major label. So this is the first time, by Island. So this is the first time that we were ever... that any of us had ever swam in those waters at all.
It was
Oh no,
yeah, it was big for all of us. And okay, so I played it for him, and thankfully, I think generally speaking, everything was cool, which was great, except for there were definitely a few moments, a few parts where I think I remember specifically some screams that Pete did. He was like, "Those need to be louder," and I was like, that's not possible. And I think maybe some harmonies or something. And then what we realized we could do was we took the tapes back, or the prints back to my little studio, and Pete actually I don't know if you remember this, but Pete overdubbed them again. And I was like, if you overdub these again, I can make a Pro Tool session with the mix, which eventually came off the 2-track, but the analog 2-track that went to mastering, but I lined it up against the Pro Tools print of it, the digital print, and I had Pete do a few of the screams, and I made a Pro Tools template with the mix, with Pete's screams, and I sent it to Dominic, our mastering engineer, and said, I need you to fly these in against the master. And so in order to get these screams louder, he had to redo them, and that's how some of those screams got louder.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I don't remember
totally
that at all.
forgot about that. Yeah, and so that's Dominic, the mastering engineer, who did that.
I didn't want to tell this. You were talking about the... there are a couple things. You're talking about ego. You're talking about the about the schedule, the time frame. We had no time, because it was really funny. We, like I said, this record was recorded over the span of a year and a half or something like that, in these separate heats. But then at the very end, it was like we're really down to the wire. You know, we have a release date and all this. And again, the other thing too is that we had, you know, half of a pretty good record. So so label was pretty confident that, you know, we're going to put this out. We're happy with this.
Yeah.
So it was like, something's coming out. If you don't, whatever you finish is coming out.
Right.
And we were leaving the next day. And you and I were way, way too ambitious with overdubs, with harmonies and guitar parts. And we layered, like, we've fucking layered like crazy. And
Harmony Machine.
Yeah, I remember one song in particular. I don't remember. I'm so stupid. I can't remember the name of it. Something about sending postcards from a plane crash. That was the name of it.
Okay.
And I remember that so up to that point, we had this kind of like chip on our shoulder about not auto-tuning as much as possible. We were really like, you know, we're not going to auto-tune. And so I really stood in that booth and sang the vast majority of this shit.
Yeah.
But then there we are, and it's the night before we leave for tour, and the lead was done and the whatever, and we were very happy with everything. But there were all these layers of vocals, all of these. I mean, that song is just layers and layers and layers. And you finally go, we're gonna tune these harmonies. We're just gonna tune this because there's no way. My voice, I'm losing my voice as I'm singing it. You know, I was just getting shredded. It's literally the last day we're in the studio. We're leaving for tour. We're gonna be gone. He has to mix this entire time.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm sorry, man. I'm gonna tune these harmonies.
I remember that.
It was, you know. And then whatever, and you kind of take it. You're like, all right, fine. So that was my one big letdown.
Wait,
you know?
wasn't there also, okay, maybe I've made this up in my head, but I've told this before, so hopefully not. I also remember at that moment, like, yeah, it was the last 2 days. You had all these freaking vocals to sing.
I had saved all these harmonies, and it was such a bad idea.
It was so much.
I know I had because we'd been lucky up to that
Just
point.
a bad idea to save them.
To have that, we had done the knockout record and whatever, where it's like, oh, we can do all these harmonies. You know, we knock them out.
Yeah.
But we dreamed even bigger. It was like,
Totally,
you know, going to the buffet and taking and putting way too much on your plate.
Totally.
And so, yeah, the last 2 days I had to sing for. And my voice was gone. I didn't know how to sing. So my voice was shredded.
It was shredded. And I remember the second to last day. So we had one more day the next day, right? One more full day. And it was the night before. And it was towards the end of the night. And Patrick, you know, was like singing, wanted to sing. And I remember thinking, man, if he sings any more, he's going to destroy his voice for the next day. And like when you're a singer, I assume when you're a singer and you're in it, you never want to stop. You just want to keep going. You're not thinking about that. And so I remember, like, I thought I was like, dude, you have to stop because we have tomorrow. And you're like, I'm not going to stop. And I was so frustrated that I think I was like, I remember going on the talkback going, if you keep singing, I'm going to come in there and fucking punch you with it.
No, that's true, actually.
And you're like, okay, I'm done.
We kind of had a little spat about it.
I totally lost it.
Well, and because it was getting really diminished returns, you know. That back to the thing about the being learned in your craft.
Yep.
Singing, I apparently was doing just fine without having any technique, but then you run up in these limitations where it's like, well, you can't. If I had known what I was doing, I probably could have sung a lot longer.
Yeah, of course.
And you know, at the time I didn't understand breath support. I didn't understand my posture. I didn't understand any of those things. So there I am, just singing like you sing, and my voice is just I'm Tom Waits by the end of it. You know.
Right, yeah.
And he's like, we're not doing this. I actually. I had started to, my voice had started to produce like these little, you know, harmonics that when you were mixing them.
That bad. Okay.
Yeah. When you're layering together and you're like, well, the fundamentals in tune with each other, but there's these harmonics that aren't. It was that bad, and so it was like, okay,
it's pretty cool. I mean, basically, it's just a huge learning experience for all of us. I mean, I know for me it was. That's for sure. It's like we're really learning how to make a record. I mean, just we had some resources and a crap ton of energy and determination.
I kind of think too that it's hard to really evolve unless you're under pressure. Like that pressure cooker brings the best out of you.
Oh, so much better. I mean, I feel like the stuff you do when no one cares, it's like whatever.
Yeah,
because you can't really simulate pressure.
No.
You can try, but it's just not the same.
Yeah.
Like when your future is on the line.
Yeah,
and it's a whole different level. Just out of curiosity, how long are your vocal sessions now?
Well, now I barely do sessions because I kind of just do it. I tend to, when I'm demoing now, I'll just kind of do it myself and just kind of, and a lot of my demo harmonies are kept in. When we did Lake Effect Kid, most of those harmonies were what I had done on when I was demoing like a session for us. Yeah, because I was just laying out like a what our Pro Tools click track was going to be. Yeah. And while I'm doing it, I was like singing a scratch vocal, and I was like, oh, I'll just sing that. I sang harmonies and whatever.
And they're great.
So most of them ended up being that. So nowadays it's kind of, I don't really sit down and do a vocal session. It's more like I do while I'm, it kind of ends up saving my voice a lot because I'll be recording guitars or something, and then in between there I'll record one line in stereo and then go back to working, and then I'll so it's a lot of these blasts of that kind of thing. That's interesting.
So get reunited after 15 years.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. How different was the process? Because when I think back 15 years ago, I was still the same person, but not entirely. Like, you guys have had entire careers since then.
Yeah. I actually would wonder what you would think, because I feel like, you've seen us.
I'm curious what you think. Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was kind of, in a lot of ways, just getting back to it. It was kind of weird. It was, because we had a really kind of good way of communicating, and most of the time too, it was the two of us in the studio all day, and then everybody else was very involved, but it was one of those things where we were the guys that would stay late and whatever. So, and it was pretty much just back to that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
it was, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I told some friends after we did it, after maybe literally 15 minutes, it seriously just felt just like it felt. Yeah. 16 years ago, obviously in a different studio and under different conditions.
With no stress.
Right, yeah.
It was like the same exact thing, but minus any of the stress. And
more resources.
And now they would totally let us use, it wasn't at that studio, but they would have let us use the 251.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we did.
We did use some 251s.
we had a pair.
Which is really funny. We had two.
A pair as overheads, right?
Their rooms or overheads or something. Yeah. But yeah, it is. It really did just feel like we really went right back into the old. Like I noticed like our sense of humors between
the jokes were all the same.
They were all the same. Like our and the dynamic of like who weighs in on what and who pushes what things. It was just like that, But then like on the flip side of it, also. There's no way to recreate something. Even same people, same everything. It's just going to be different because it's so much later. So it's just like all those inherent differences were different just because of time. But I don't know. Yeah, it was. It was pretty similar.
Sounds like it was a good time though.
It was a great time. Yeah,
it was hilarious.
It was really fun. Yeah. Well, we were supposed to do it in 2 days at Sunset Sound, and in like 2 12-hour days is how they give you the studio, I think, or whatever. But and I think like the night before, 2 nights before, Patrick text me because you had an obligation that came up on the second day where he had to leave, like a couple hours after our session started, and a couple hours after. I guess it kind of did, because it really like pushed it because the second day would typically be like Patrick and I, and we're like, cool, we're gonna do it, and it was just like great, we're still gonna make it happen, and we spent the first day and we just went through everything, right? We did everything, but I do remember thinking that we would probably still do your lead vocal the second day. For whatever reason, I had that in my head, but we had been going for, I remember this at least, 11 hours. We get the studio for 12. I mean, I'm sure you could stay longer if you need to, but and Patrick had, at that point, Patrick had done all of his stuff, piano, organ, guitars. It was a full day. And I remember you said to me, it was like whatever it was, 11:10 or 10:10 within the last hour. And you said, I want to do the lead vocal. Let's do the lead vocal. I was like, great. And I think I remember saying to you, like, we've got 50 minutes. Is that cool? And you're like, great, let's do it. And I was like, awesome. And and he just like typical went in the booth and just, and I'm kind of commenting on this mainly because you were talking about like how you do lead vocals today. And I don't know if maybe this is, this was this one studio version of many, I'm sure, of how you do it. But he did it in one, we just did it like normal, I guess, in one sitting and just went through. And I thought it was awesome.
there's a ton of harmonies, but you're saying that those are from the demo?
Sort of, yeah. So well, so this song was one that we had demoed a bunch of years ago on a record, Folie à Deux, and it kind of came back up as like, hey, we should record this song for real, because it was out there as a demo. And so I kind of told Sean this when we put the session together. I was like, we can't change much production-wise because the audience has already heard a demo version. They're already acquainted with it. So basically, we need to do a properly recorded version of this song. So structurally, we're not, because that's another thing too, is every producer has a different methodology, but Sean and I, the way I'm used to working and the way I'm used to being worked with, we really get our hands dirty with, song structure, that kind of stuff. And it was like, we can't change anything.
Yeah, you've got the most massive case of demoitis because it's everyone, your fans
heard
love
it. Yeah. So we've heard it, we know what it is, so we can't change it. It is the demo, but we have to now record a proper version of it. So I said, I was like, so I was recording I was basically, to try and expedite our recording process, I was playing with, just setting out a tempo and maybe having a scratch track for Andy to play to, so we didn't have to deal with that on the day, And while I was doing that, I was like, well, I'll just do these harmonies, and my chain was basically the same as what we'd be using. The only difference was it was a C800, which was way, way brighter. So I think that was one thing that we had to contend with. But we EQ'd it. It was fine.
So just like in your personal writing room.
I'm in between studios right now, so it was in my closet.
I love it. His personal studio is a closet. He showed me a picture. I'm
it's a closet. I got there's a C800. There's my vocal chain in a rack and my shirts. It's great. It's great. So but whatever. So I kind of I brought those in, and I was kind of part of it was like, it's to help stabilize the session, but then also if we don't need to re-record these, if we get these, I sent them to you. I was like, what do you think? And you were like, oh yeah, these are usable. So so it was basically, it was kind of nice, because then the guesswork and the frustration, I feel like harmony vocals are so much fun to write and such a pain in the ass to record. And so it was kind of like that thing of like, I kind of liked doing it by myself in my room, in my closet. Just that thing of let me get that again. You don't have to do all that a bunch of times. You can just sit there and record that. So then when I'm doing the lead vocal, I really got to just focus on singing and let somebody else hear it. And
it was awesome.
So you got to pick, which was really cool for me, to like just be focusing on the singing and kind of play like an instrumentalist a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we did do that. He did his lead vocal in 45 minutes, literally whatever we had left that night. We both went home. I woke up in my hotel and just comped it on my laptop really quick, knowing I had Patrick for a couple hours. The next day, I played it for you. I think we made a couple adjustments.
Yeah, I think we punched in a couple things, but it was pretty much...
Yeah, no, it was done. I think honestly, the punches you did, I think a lot were like those like bridge runs, like you're kind of
there was one run I wasn't happy with, but it was really funny. It was. I think I gave him like 5 takes or something.
Yeah, it was really straightforward. I
didn't. Sometimes I'll go part to part. I'll sing through a section of the song and until we get it right. But that one I think we just did, just front to back, and
it's pretty straightforward. And I personally love the vocal. And I remember even the next day I told Patrick, I was like, I don't have any autotune on here. I don't think it should have any autotune. And not that I want to state this, not that I would ever think that Patrick needs it. Like, Patrick knows that I think he's one of the most phenomenal singers. I really do. I mean, I really do. But still, it was for me, it was like, I'm working with now Fall Out Boy 15 years later, who's a huge band, and it's like, like I feel like someone's gonna tell me I should need to put autotune on at some point, or I'm gonna get fired, And I was like, just want to make sure this is cool.
I mean, there's still enough ego in there where I'm like, no autotune, man.
Right? I love it, and it's great.
It's weird though. I was thinking about this on the way here. I have done, now that I've worked with so many different producers. some people put it on as an effect. It's almost like, like you would like I don't mean like the obvious auto-tune effect that everyone knows.
No,
it's
got a sound.
Yeah,
to it.
it has this kind of innate kind of. There's just a slickness to it that some people use the same way they would use a reverb or something or a delay. You don't really think about it, and it's there. And I have worked with some people who've done that, and it hasn't. Me carrying in that kind of snobbery, I go, well, it actually sounds okay in this context. Okay. Yeah. But I still, at the end of the day, I'm like, don't tune me, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
I've worked with some like amazing vocalists who requested it because of that sound. Not the obvious sound, but just that thing that it imparts on the tone. They just liked it, and they didn't need it. So.
Oh yeah. Well, when we did a record with Babyface, and it was very much part of his chain. He had a hardware auto tune, and it was no kidding. Yeah, and it was very much part of, at the time anyway. It was just part of the chain.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because his engineer, I wish I could remember the guy's name. He was so great and forthcoming with information, but he's like, oh yeah, there's no secrets here, we tune everybody, and he was playing me, I won't say who, but he was playing me a singer, his untuned and tuned, and it was perfectly in key. I mean, this singer was nailing it exactly in tune, but it was like the difference at the time. This was 2007 or something. I don't remember when it was, but like. It was like the difference between radio and not radio. Just turning it on and off. It was like, so interesting.
Well, I think the
just
only
the tone
way,
of it,
just the tone, just the way it imparted that thing.
The only way to get it to do that, to where it does that thing, and you can't really tell that it's tuned.
Yes,
is for the vocals to be sung well.
No, that's the trick, isn't it? You still have to sing really well.
Yeah. Damn it.
It's not that shortcut.
Well, it's funny because there's that perception that people that it's used because people suck, and that's not really the case. I mean, yes, it is sometimes used because people suck, but that's not the only reason.
But I'm sure all of us, I'm sure even the majority of people listening to this are probably involved in recording and know pretty innate, pretty instantly, like, nope, shitty singer still sucks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Totally.
Still sucks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's no real fixing that.
I know all of us have done that one session where you're like, I don't even know how to edit this.
Just one?
But I have no idea how I'm going to make this work.
Oh yeah.
There was you're just looking at you're looking at waveforms and in Pro Tools like I cannot make these match in any way that could possibly sound like anything anyone would listen to.
Yeah, auto-tune ain't fixing that.
Nope.
Absolutely not. So, question about Lake Effect Kid, the extra instrumentation, is that you?
Yeah, that's kind of my favorite thing to do in the studio, honestly, is like I said, I was never the world's best drummer, but I was okay, and I kind of become okay at a lot of stuff, so I can kind of hang at,
a lot more than okay in my opinion. Yeah.
That's what I was saying about a T-shaped person. Like that's you want to work with people like that, I think, especially if you're an instrumentalist who's like great at guitar. You want to work with someone like you who can do all that stuff.
I'll never shred, but I can play. Joe and I play the duet there, the guitar duet there, or whatever. So like I can play, but I can't. But I'm not,
but that was Patrick, like the piano and the organ and all that stuff. Yeah.
Which is that was one of the things too, is we have this extra time kind of, and so I was like, you got a B3?
I remember that. That was great. He's like, oh, you got a piano? Like, all right, let's mic that thing up. Yeah.
So
that was good.
We got those 251s to use them for something, So.
And one of the details I thought was really cool was, how the tambourine at the beginning keeps the makes it feel a lot more intense, gives it a lot more motion, and then when it drops out, the hi-hat takes that over. I thought that was a nice touch. That
was a thing that I had kind of, when the band had done, we did Big Hero 6, the Disney movie, and one of the things that I noticed with those notes that we would get from the studio, and they were really cool, by the way. I was really impressed with that that. I've worked on other film things where it wasn't that cool, but that one was really cool experience to do. But a lot of the notes were like, we want it to feel faster, and I'm like, but without changing the tempo, because like we've locked the tempo in it. I'm like, right. So the only way to accomplish that is subdivision. I mean, that's the only way you can make something. I know, and whatever. So it's like it's this. Cool. How do you balance the subdivision, but that makes it feel up tempo without actually ruining the tempo, because then you can play things too fast and have it suck.
That's cool. I could see how like them giving comments like that actually make you figure out new ways.
Oh no,
to do
it was
things.
great. It was really helpful.
It's awesome.
It was very cool. Like I said, the kind of notes, the caliber of notes, but it was the kind of like, okay, how do I do this? Because picture's locked, so we can't change the tempo at all, but we need it to feel faster. And you're like, I guess we're doing 16th notes.
So true constructive criticism.
Yes, totally. Yeah. It's funny when that happens, and you're like, oh, I could actually learn from this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, we've all gotten mixed notes and know what it's like when criticism is just painful. But then every once in a while, there are people who know how to communicate and tell you something they want that forces you to evolve your abilities.
Well, that was Sean and I have known each other long enough that we've allowed each other to get really angry in front of each other. Yeah. And one of the things...
That's a good thing.
It is, kind of, because in a lot of ways, one of the things that was really good about it was mixed notes. I learned what are really shitty mixed notes. because I watched Sean get fucking livid over some mixed notes.
Well, some are so brutal.
Yeah, some are so brutal. Well, but there's also things where like, until I had really studied and learned about frequencies, for example, right? When you say, I want the snare louder, and then you're sitting there watching a guy not turn the snare up, you're like, what's going on? And you're like, I'm carving out space. Just shut up, man. Just wait. Yeah. I'm doing the thing. It takes a while. But it's that kind of thing where I watched you do it enough times where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna just not.
Okay, yeah. Interesting.
I'm gonna not comment until whatever.
My ego was probably more fragile back then. Maybe it's just as fragile.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. But I mean, it's a thing. You learn. It also in the same way, talking about the, probably what I would imagine for a conductor, if you don't have the language, if you can't talk the same language as the people you're working with, it doesn't matter what you're trying to say. And that's the same thing with mixed notes. This is a problem that musicians run into, not knowing what they're really asking for. Is like, I want the drum louder, I want the snare louder, or whatever. It's like, no, you really liked when it had this reverb on it, but you don't know how to articulate that. Yeah. So
but it's a two-way street, though. I think great mixers and producers should be, like, part of their job is to interpret.
Absolutely.
To interpret what non-technical people want.
Yes. There's a chapter in one of those mixing books. I can't remember which book it was, but there's a chapter where it's like, I'm sorry, you will have to deal with people.
It's
a chapter.
Yeah, that's great.
It's so true. Yeah. Well, with that, I think this is a good stopping point. I want to thank you both for coming on. It's been great talking to you.
Cheers.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
This episode of the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast has been brought to you by Telefunken Electroacoustic. Telefunken Electroacoustic has been following the tradition of excellence and innovation set forth by the original Telefunken GmbH of Germany that began over 100 years ago, with one foot rooted in the rich history of the brand, and the other in new microphone innovations for both stage and studio applications. Telefunken Electroacoustic is recognized as one of the industry leaders in top quality microphones. For more info, go to t-funk.com. If you like the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, make sure you leave us a review, subscribe, and send us a message if you want to get in touch.